The envelope was so thin I could see its crease under the lights. Someone clapped behind me. Someone else raised a phone, but all I heard was the faint rustle as my parents slipped it into my hand. 2 bills, nothing more. Your grandma sent this for you, they said, smiling for the room. Not for me. I kept my face still, letting the noise blur around the edges. The cake, the lights, the people, it all felt staged. What none of them knew was that this envelope wasn't the real gift. The real one was coming, and it would ruin the night. I learned early that some people in a family glow under every light, and some disappear even when they're standing in the same room. When I was 15, I tried to make myself visible. I spent 3 weeks sewing a dress for our school talent show, cutting fabric bought from the clearance bin at the craft store, staying up past midnight to trim the hem until it fell just right. The night before the event, I carried it into the living room, hopeful in a way I hadn't grown out of yet. My mother sat on the couch scrolling through her tablet, my father buried in a newspaper, my sister on the rug showing off a new phone case that lit up when she tapped it. I held the dress up like a small flag. Nobody looked. My mother finally glanced over, offered a quick, "That's cute," and immediately turned back to the glow of my sister's screen. The dress drooped a little in my hands. I told myself it didn't matter. That pattern never changed. Every time I edged forward, something shiny in my sister's orbit pulled the room away from me. On my birthdays, I'd unwrap practical things: socks, a planner, a coat meant to last for years. My sister would tear through boxes of earrings, handbags, perfumes, the kinds of things my parents said were fun for a girl her age. When I brought home good grades, the papers stayed on the fridge for a single night before being replaced by a new receipt taped up for my sister's effort award. When my father needed someone to stay home with a sick relative, it was always me. When my sister wanted to skip a shift or drop a class, it was always excused. And then there was the money. My grandmother Eleanor lived 3 hours away in St. Louis. She sent cards often. They arrived in pale envelopes with her looping handwriting, always smelling faintly of lavender. I used to get excited when I saw them in the mailbox, thinking maybe she'd tucked in a few dollars or a note just for me. But my mother always opened them first. She'd stand at the kitchen sink, tear them neatly, slide the contents into her hand, and call it family support. A day later, my sister had new boots or a pair of earrings. Whenever I asked if Grandma ever sent anything for me, specifically, my father would tighten his jaw and say, "Don't question us, Joy. We know what's best." Little by little, I learned to stop asking. I started putting everything I felt into the margins of my sketchbook lines, silhouettes, outfits I imagined wearing on a life I didn't have yet. I'd sit on my bedroom floor, fabric scraps spread around me the same way other kids surrounded themselves with toys. The house outside my door buzzed with my sister's wants, my parents' justifications, the usual choreography. Mine stayed quiet. Looking back, I don't think there was a single moment when I decided to become invisible. It was more like the house trained me. Every small dismissal, every turned head, every envelope that never reached my hands, they folded me into the background until silence felt like the safest place to stand. That was the day I learned my place in this family, and it was a place that would follow me for years. The weeks after graduation felt strangely bright on the surface. My parents hosted small dinners, played cheerful music in the mornings, acted lighter than I'd seen them in years, but the brightness had edges, sharp ones. My mother came home one afternoon wearing a necklace I had never seen before, thin gold catching the kitchen light. She touched it like it was nothing. "A little extra support from your grandma," she said, brushing past me to reach the spice cabinet. The same phrase appeared again 2 days later when she wore emerald earrings that matched nothing she owned. My father picked up the pattern too. He started mentioning a spa downtown, talking about weekly appointments like they were prescriptions. "It helps me unwind," he'd say, dropping his keys on the table, the gleam of a new watch sliding into view as if by accident. None of it fit our life. None of it fit the tight budget speeches I'd grown up hearing. Lila, of course, leaned into the glow. She walked into the kitchen one evening with a designer handbag hooked over her wrist, the logo catching the overhead light. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she said, flipping her hair before pulling out a smartphone so new it still had the protective film on. I asked her how she could afford it. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to dismiss, not amuse. Mind your own business, Joy. I tried to. I really did. But it got harder when the house itself started slipping. A box from a delivery company sat half open in the hallway, another piece of jewelry for my mother. The receipt lay next to it, its total circled in pen. Later that night, while walking past my parents' bedroom, I heard my mother's voice through the cracked door. She was on the phone, laughing. "The bonus from your mother, it's more than enough," she said, her voice light, careless. I stopped in the hallway, one foot in the sliver of light, the other in the dark. I didn't push the door. I didn't ask what she meant. I just stood there, absorbing the pieces, forcing them into a shape I wasn't ready to name. The next morning, my mother complained about bills while fastening her new bracelet. She said we're all making sacrifices and looked directly at me. I stirred my coffee. The spoon slowed, stopped, then moved again. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. The morning after my mother's comment, I walked to work earlier than usual. The air was cool, the kind that sits on your skin before the sun settles. At the fabric shop, I unlocked the door, stepped into the familiar chemical scent of dye and cotton, and told myself to focus on bolts of fabric, not the numbers circling my head. Still, every time I cut a length of muslin or refolded a stack of patterns, flashes of new jewelry handbags and spa memberships slipped in like unwanted threads. Something was off. Something was wrong. And pretending not to see it felt suddenly impossible. Maya noticed before I said anything. During our usual coffee break, she slid into the seat across from me at the cafe, her hair pulled into a loose bun, name tag still clipped crooked to her shirt from her bookstore shift. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, stirring sugar into her drink without taking her eyes off me. I shrugged, tracing the rim of my cup. The house feels different. Different how I hesitated. Words like stolen money and suspicious spending felt too heavy to speak out loud. They're buying things that don't make sense. Spa appointments, jewelry, bags, phones. Stuff we have never afforded. Stuff we shouldn't afford. Maya leaned forward. "Where is the money coming from?" The question landed in the center of my chest. I looked out the window, watched the city move around us, buses pulling in people crossing streets, the steady rhythm of a world that made more sense than the one inside my house. "I don't know," I said, "but I think I need to pay attention." "Joy," she said, voice low but firm, "you've ignored things your whole life. Maybe it's time you start watching." So I did. That week, I turned into a quiet accountant of other people's purchases. At home, I noted the small developments, the bracelet my mother wore, though she never owned jewelry before the watch. My father checked even when he wasn't late for anything, the way Lila walked differently with her new bag swinging at her side. They didn't notice me watching. They never really had. At the fabric shop during slow hours, I opened my sketchbook and began writing numbers in the margins, estimated costs of the items they flaunted. I didn't write their names, just dollar signs and descriptions. A small secret ledger built into the background of my designs. It gave me something solid to hold on to, something measurable inside a life where I had always been told not to measure. I opened a new bank account, too. Quietly, one afternoon before my shift, I transferred part of each paycheck there, even if it was only a few dollars. The banker asked if I wanted alerts on my phone. I said yes. It felt like claiming a corner of my life nobody else could touch. At night, while the house slept, I organized my sketches into folders, dresses, coats, tops, each with a small tag in the corner. Not names, numbers. The same way I'd started tagging the expenses I saw around the house. For the first time, everything in my life was gaining structure. It was during one of these late nights that my phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Proud of you for graduating, Joy. I'm visiting next week. I want to hear about your fashion line." My stomach tightened. My mind flew straight to the envelope, the thin crease, the 2 bills, the smile my parents performed for the room, and then to the jewelry, the spa, the phone Lila twirled in her hand. I read the message again, and again. I didn't know what to say. The next evening, I called Maya from my apartment above the garage. "She's coming," I said, and I don't know what to tell her. You tell her the truth. I don't want to blow up my family." Maya exhaled. "Joy." They blew it up. "You're just walking through the smoke." I didn't answer, but her words stuck. The days leading up to Eleanor's visit felt like watching a stage being built. My mother scrubbed the house until her hands were raw. My father rehearsed stories about hard times and stretching what we have. Lila did nothing, scrolling on her phone, occasionally asking if her outfit looked casual rich. I went to work, came home, and watched all of it quietly. The house didn't feel like a home, it felt like a set. And I felt strangely detached from the roles everyone expected us to play. On the day Eleanor arrived, the air smelled like roasted chicken and polished wood. The table was set with dishes we only used for holidays. My mother fussed over placemats. My father adjusted silverware. Lila checked her reflection in the microwave door. When Eleanor stepped inside, her presence cut through the room. She hugged me first, tightly, warmly, and said, "My designer." I felt something loosen in my chest. A thread finally pulled free. Dinner began with safe topics: traffic, weather, my job at the fabric shop. I answered carefully, offering versions of the truth that wouldn't disrupt anything. I kept my voice, even my eyes down when necessary. But every time Eleanor asked about my fashion line, about progress, about plans, something thudded inside me. The sketches, the late nights, the envelope, the number I'd seen in my mother's hand when she circled a receipt, my own name missing from anything Grandma had supposedly sent. For most of my life, I'd protected my parents from the truth. I had thought silence was loyalty. I had thought keeping the peace was my duty. But that night, as I watched Eleanor's eyes soften whenever she spoke to me, a quiet decision formed. A line I hadn't drawn before. If she asked directly about the money, if she said the number out loud, I wouldn't lie to her. Not this time. Not anymore. Dinner was almost finished when it happened. The kind of moment that doesn't arrive with warning, just a small shift, a change in breathing, a pause between clinks of silverware. Eleanor set her fork down the metal, touching the plate with a soft, decisive sound. She looked at me, not at the table, not at the food, but straight at me. "So, Joy," she said quietly, "did the 18,000 I sent help your fashion line?" The room froze. My mother's hand stopped mid-air, fingers tightening around her napkin. My father's glass lowered an inch, his eyes flicking to my mother as if she might answer for me. Lila's smile fell, her phone sliding slightly in her palm. I felt every heartbeat in my throat. For a second, I could hear nothing. No conversation from the neighboring house, no hum of the refrigerator, just the weight of her question hanging above the table. The number pulsed in the air like a siren no one could shut off. I thought of the envelope on my graduation day. 2 bills, nothing more. I thought of the necklace, the earrings, the spa appointments, the handbag swinging from Lila's wrist, all the unexplained luxuries, all the quiet explanations I'd swallowed. I lifted my eyes. "I only got 200, I said. 4 words, quiet, plain. But when they landed, the entire room changed shape. Eleanor's face shifted instantly, warmth draining, steadiness sharpening. She didn't shout, she didn't gasp. Her expression simply hardened, like something inside her snapped into place. She turned to my parents with a calmness that felt more dangerous than any raised voice. Where she asked, "Is the rest of the money?" my mother blinked rapidly, color rising in her cheeks. We used it for family needs," she whispered. What needs Eleanor's tone never rose. It didn't have to. My father cleared his throat. "It's complicated, Mildred. Things were tight. We handled it the best we could." Eleanor didn't look away. "I sent that money for Joy. I wrote it in every note, for her designs, for her future." Silence thickened. My mother's napkin twisted into a rope. My father stared at the table. Lila shrank into her chair, her new phone glinting beside her like a guilty witness. Then, in a single breath, the truth cracked open. My mother whispered, "We spent it. On things. For the house. For Lila. For us." The words hung there limp and ugly. Eleanor inhaled slowly. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "There will be no more support. Not a dollar. Not a visit. Not a favor." She turned back to me, and her eyes softened just slightly. "From now on, anything meant for you comes directly to you. No middle hands." My parents sat hollow, the performance stripped away. Lila clutched her phone as if it could shield her. Later on the porch, with the night air drifting in, Eleanor told me about the years of checks, the amounts, the intentions she thought were honored. And then, she said the words that cut through all the noise I'd lived in. "You're coming to work with me. You'll learn the studio. And my apartment in Springfield, it's yours now." I didn't speak at first. The porch light flickered. Somewhere inside a door shut softly. Then I exhaled a slow, steady breath I felt all the way to my bones. "I'll do it," I said. The week after that dinner moved quietly, like the house was trying not to disturb itself. I packed my things one drawer at a time, folding clothes I'd worn for years, sliding sketchbooks into a suitcase that suddenly felt too small for everything I'd held back. Bills began stacking on the kitchen counter, unopened envelopes with red print showing through thin paper. My father avoided the living room. My mother cried in short, trembling bursts. Lila stayed mostly in her room, her phone lighting the doorway each time she checked it. On the morning I left, the house felt colder than usual. My suitcase stood upright by the door, the zipper drawn tight. My mother pleaded first, her voice cracking around the words. My father tried to frame everything as a misunderstanding. Lila said she didn't know the money was meant for me. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it no longer mattered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I just said, "You took what was meant for my future and spent it on yourselves. I can't trust you anymore." Then I opened the door and stepped out, the sound of it closing behind me, softer than I expected. The apartment Eleanor gave me was small but bright. Morning light spilled across the floor, warming the blank walls, making the empty space feel like possibility instead of lack. I made coffee, sat at a small table by the window, and opened a fresh sketchbook. For the first time, the page didn't feel like escape, it felt like direction. At the studio in St. Louis, fabric hissed under steam scissors, clicked machines hummed. I blended into the rhythm easily, as if the noise knew me. And somewhere inside that quiet shift, I realized I finally belonged to myself. In the weeks that followed, I learned that silence can remake a life. Not the kind I grew up with, the kind that swallowed me whole, but the kind that opens a door and leaves it wide for light to enter. Each morning in that small apartment, the sun hit the same spot on the table where I kept my newest sketches, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide anything. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the place you stand when you finally decide what your life is worth. If this story echoes yours, let it remind you your future belongs in your own hands.